Hello, everybody. Welcome to International Podcast Day 2020. September 30th, Steve, rolls around every year. It's a great time of celebration for the entire space. How's your podcast day going so far?
It's going great. I'm on my, I don't know, 30 cups of coffee already. But you know what? Enough of you and I chit-chatting. We got great people on the stream this year that we want to hear from.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible what's going on this year. This hour we have Lynsay Gould. She's launching her new podcast network today on International Podcast Day. We are Emmeline, so we're going to get to her in just a second. But before we do that, I do want to thank our International Podcast Day sponsor, Blueberry. Real quickly, they are a proud sponsor of IPD since 2015. They've been dedicated to providing the most essential podcast tools in the industry. Check this out, since 2005. So you can do more than publish with Blueberry. You can connect with your listeners, learn how to monetize your podcast, and of course, what we all want as podcasters, to watch our shows thrive. So you can learn more over at blueberry.com. And of course, you see right on our screen a little start your free trial. So make sure you go over there and get a 30-day free trial there. So, Steve, what do you think we get into this next session? What do you think?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, I would like to introduce Lynsay Gould. She is phenomenal. I actually got introduced to her from our good friend, Mark Asquith, over there in the UK. He, as a matter of fact, also launched into his podcast day career, I think 2015 International Podcast Day. I could be mistaken, but I'm glad he made the connection. And I'm glad, Lynsay, that you were here talking about what's really holding women back from starting podcasts. I think it's a very important conversation to be had. So I am going to welcome you to the International Podcast Day community and enjoy. We look forward to having what you have to share. I'm going to bounce out and let you take over.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here. So everyone, welcome. I'm really happy to say International Podcast Day 2022. It's been a fantastic day for us over here in the UK. We're just after 5 p.m. now, so we're a little bit later than you over across the pond. So we're coming to the end of our day, and it's been a busy one because we've been launching our new podcast network, which I'll tell you a little bit about later on. But it's really the basis of the conversation that I'm going to be having with you today, which is all about what is really holding women back from starting podcasts. So I'll just introduce myself, let you know who I am, what I do, all of that good stuff, and then we'll dive in. So I'm Lynsay Gould. I'm the founder of the Podcast Boutique, which is a podcast and video production agency here in the UK. So we work with entrepreneurs, businesses, brands, corporates to help them to grow and start podcasts that are really going to help them to grow their businesses. We provide education as well on starting podcasts, monetizing them, as well as our courses and programs. So I'm also the founder of the Podcasting for Business Awards, which we started a couple of years ago in the pandemic, which were designed to support and encourage indie podcasters. That is where my passion lies. And it's actually, when I think back, the reason that Emmeline has been birthed, actually, because it's all about supporting the smaller podcasters, which I know there's lots of you like that today. So I'm the founder of Emmeline, which is a brand new podcast network for women and non-binary podcasters. And as I've said, in our agency, we work with all sorts of people, all sorts of companies and businesses to help them start and grow. So I'm going to ask you a question. What percentage of the top podcasts do you think are hosted by women? Now, we did some research this year and we're constantly doing some research on this subject. And honestly, I thought it would be low, but not quite this low. So this is what Emmeline is about. It's about changing the status quo, about breaking down barriers and supporting you. So we're getting 20% up there on the screen. Yeah, we've got a few more. It's actually 11. 11% of the top podcasts globally right now are hosted by women. And it's really unfortunate that all I'm able to say is men or women, because that's another thing we need to change. There are non-binary podcasters out there who aren't even factored in to the podcasting stats. So we need to change this. So at the moment, all I can say to you is that 11% of the top podcasts are hosted by women right now. So let's dive into this content. That is exactly why we need to be having this conversation, because we need to change things. As much as I love all of you guys, we need equality in the podcasting industry, behind the scenes, as well as here behind the microphone, actually hosting podcasts as well. So it's only 11% of top podcasts are hosted by women currently. And it's even less when we think about women of color. So let's change this. So we did quite a bit of research looking at 320 shows from 16 different categories. And 65 of those shows were hosted by women and 18 were co-hosted with women. So at the most, 26% of the top 320 shows from 16 different categories hosted by women. We need to change this, don't we? I'm going to go into a bit of detail to show you where these figures lie. And you'll be able to see in terms of the different categories what the percentages are. So we've got a great big fat zero there for sports podcasts. So 0% of the top 20 Apple Sport podcasts were hosted by women. 5% of the top 100 globally. 20% comedy. 40% for society and culture. None yet over 50%. Health and fitness, 20%. Arts, 25%. Education, 15%. And only 10% of the top 20 business podcasts are hosted by women, even though I know some incredible business women who run very, very successful businesses. Their podcasts aren't featured in that top 20. 15% of the top 20 science podcasts, 20% history, 25% music, 20% TV and film, 5% technology. So we're seeing a bit of a trend here. The science, the technology, the business podcasts are even lower. Government category, 10%, leisure, 10%, religion and spirituality, 20%, and a massive 95% of podcasts are hosted by women in the kids and family category, disproportionately so. So why is it that so few women make it to the very top of the charts? Well, it seems that fewer women are starting podcasts than men. And research is showing us now, we've got some research from Infinite Dial, that as few as 22% of all active podcasts are hosted by women and people who identify as women. This stat is growing, which is great, but it's still not high enough. So we all know that podcasts are fantastic. That's why we're here today. That's why we're celebrating podcasting generally. But why? Well, why do we love podcasts so much? Well, there's a variety of reasons, but some of the big ones are, being an incredible way to build a connection with an audience. You can develop trust, rapport, community. So why are so few women starting podcasts in the first place, when typically these types of traits are typically female traits? Community, connection, rapport, building relationships. They are typically female traits, but they're not starting them in big numbers. So after teaching hundreds of women to start their own podcasts and working with them in our agency, we found 5 key barriers that women are coming up against time and time again with their podcasts. Tech. So from what we've seen, there is a belief that sometimes they aren't techie enough to tackle a project like starting a podcast. So this is coming from women who come to us in our agency telling us they want to start a podcast, but they haven't started it yet. And when we've delved into why that has been, these are the reasons that are coming up. So tech. So the belief that it's really too complex. Now, a little side story about this. I was at the podcast show in London earlier this year, which was fantastic, by the way. So if you do get the chance to go next year. I'm going to be there again. But what I found from the tech stands that were there, so all of the podcasting equipment stands and so on, They were all, with the exception of one, manned by men. Manned by men. So the only people that were on those stands were men. They looked very masculine. The environment was very masculine. The people who were going up to the stands were mainly men. So there's this belief that it's not for us as women. And we know that's not true. We know that that is not true. Let's have a look at the next one. Judgment. So this is the judgment of ourselves. So not liking the sound of our own voices, worrying that people are going to laugh or talk about you online or even troll you, worrying that employees from past businesses or even your current job might find your podcast and talk to you about it, and the embarrassment around that. So there is a lot of this going on, not wanting other people to see what you're doing, worrying about whether you're good enough. It's a confidence issue. The next one is fear. So worrying that they won't have enough to talk about. This is a real one. And it's also the reason why a lot of the women who come to us to start a podcast want to start an interview-based podcast because they have this belief that they won't have to speak as much, which is crazy. So for those of you who have business podcasts or podcasts, related to your brand or what it is you do in work, you know that when you have a solo show, that's far better for you to build a relationship with your potential clients and your listeners and so on. But this fear that you're going to run out of things to say is very real for a lot of women. They worry that they don't know enough, and they worry that they're just not good enough. So typically when, actually, I'll tell you that story in a second. There's a story I want to tell you about when men come to see us in the agency and when women do. So I'll share that with you in a second. Time is a big one. So there is this belief that it takes way too much time to start and grow a podcast that they, quite frankly, don't have. So this comes from the people we've spoken to, which is a lot of people, hundreds of people. We typically have people tell us that they are the main caregiver in their home, no matter what that means. It might be that they're in charge of care for parents, elderly relatives, or children, or even pets from that perspective. And there's this worry that it's going to take way too long. And we all know that it isn't, super, super easy to start a podcast. It's a low barrier to entry. But if we want to do it well, it does take a bit of time. And it takes time to record, it takes time to edit and put it all together so it sounds fabulous. And then it takes time to promote it, as we all know. But we all know as well, if you're already a podcaster, that when you start your podcast and you get your systems and your processes in place, or even if you're going to outsource your production or part of your production, things do get quicker. What we do more of, we get more efficient at. But there's this belief that it takes way too long, or in most cases, at least double the amount of time that it actually takes, people come to me and say. The next one is around money. So this is a big one. It's a belief that it takes a significant investment to start a podcast. Now, it doesn't. We know this. We know also that we can spend hundreds and hundreds of pounds or dollars on podcasting equipment. But we also know we can start with what we have. And we also know that we can upgrade as we go. So if you have a microphone that you've had for a few years and you have your headphones and you've got a way to record and a way to edit, then use what you have to start. You don't have to have a huge outlay right at the beginning of your podcasting journey. It doesn't cost a lot of money at all. It's one of the cheapest ways, actually, to reach an audience. If you think about, if you have a business and you want to get out there to your audience or to a new audience, you're going to be spending a lot of money on things like Facebook ads, or at least paid ads on whichever platform. Podcasting is free. It's free to listen to, and it's pretty inexpensive to create as well. So this belief around things costing way too much money, it's not quite true. But again, it's a huge barrier for women. So this is a story that I wanted to share with you. So I work with men and women in our podcast agency. There are more women than men, granted, but when we do have men come to us in the agency, the question that they will ask me is generally something like this: how will you get me to the top of the charts? And it's great. Great. It's great that they have that confidence and that belief in their ability to get to the top of the charts. What makes me smile every time I think about this and tell people about this is that I'll have conversations with women which are more along the lines of, do you really think that this is a good idea? Do you think I'm going to be able to do this consistently? You know, do you think my voice is okay for podcasting? All of those self-doubt questions come up. And I hold my hands up, I have never, ever had a man say those sorts of things to me. They will always assume that the podcast is going to be great. And I think it's great. We need to be channeling that inner confidence as women. As women, we need to have all of our ducks in a row, don't we, beforehand? If you've heard that term before, we need to have everything lined up. We need to have everything in order. We need to have everything perfect and know the outcome for every possible way that things might go. But men, generally speaking, they just go for it. It's the same when they apply for jobs. So women will look at a job description and they'll have to mentally tick off in their heads that they can do everything that's on that job description. Where a man, this again has been proven with research, that a man, if they can say they can do 50% of what's on that job description, they'll still apply for it and expect to get an interview. And I love that about men. I love that they have this inner confidence, and I think we need to channel it more. Now, I'm not suggesting that every single man has tons of confidence, but generally speaking here, they have more confidence in terms of getting projects off the ground and getting started. So let's move on. So how are we going to do this? So it comes from a belief that your voice as a woman deserves to be heard, right? So we need to channel that confidence. And the way that we do that is having this strong belief, this strong thought running through your mind all of the time that your voice deserves to be heard and that the message that you're going to be sharing on your podcast is going to help somebody. Now, it might be that your podcast is a comedy show. It could be a panel. It could be a true crime show. It could be a business podcast. It could be something about hobbies. It could be a politics show or a news show. Whatever it is, you need to have the confidence and the inner belief that it deserves to be heard and that your voice has gravitas and that you are going to help somebody. Because it's not about you, it's about them. And this is something I say to my clients and my students all the time, all of the time, when they're worrying about content, when they're worrying about showing up, when they're worrying about their voice, when they're worrying about whether they're good enough. This simple statement tends to snap them out of it. And it's true, because the podcast that you create, the content that you're putting together, it really isn't about you. It's all about your listeners. All of it. And if you're starting a podcast for yourself or as a way to get known or a way to be famous, brilliant. You carry on with that. That's fantastic. But really, the best podcasts out there, the podcasts that are doing really well, are those, in my opinion, where it feels like you have a connection with the host, where you're listening in to a conversation amongst friends, where you feel that you're getting a tangible benefit from listening to that podcast. And that by the time you've listened to that episode, you've come out of it knowing something new that you didn't know before you press play. Okay, so it's not about you, it's all about them. So when you shift that focus from you and how you're feeling and move it to the listener, things become easier. So if you are a woman watching this right now, or you're catching this on the replay, and if you have had on your mind, I really do want to start, but I just don't think I can do it. It's not about you. It is about them. Okay. And the reason I'm going to share this with you is a little story that I've talked to people about mainly during the pandemic. And it's this. And it might feel a bit cheesy to hear this, but depending on the content of your podcast, your episode could be the one time this week that your listener feels heard, connected, understood, and not alone. And it's genuinely true. And it's never been more true than during the pandemic. There is a lot of social isolation. Can't speak. There has been a lot of social isolation over the past few years. And a lot of people have changed as a result of that. A lot of people are lonelier. So people looking forward to your episode each week so they can feel heard, they feel understood, they feel reassured, they feel like they've had a laugh that day. You never know where the ripple effect of your podcast is going to reach. And this keeps me going. It keeps a lot of my clients and students going. When your downloads are low, when you're not sure who's listening, when you're thinking, why am I doing this? Because you love podcasting, but you maybe it's been a little bit slower to grow. Remember this. Take a screenshot, take a picture of this right now and share it with anybody else who is a podcaster who might be struggling right now, because your episode could be the one time this week that somebody feels not alone. Okay, so please do remember that. So let's get on to overcoming some of these barriers, because I don't just want to tell you what the problems are, I want to help you to get over these things as well. So let's look at tech. My view around tech is to learn all you can. Reach out to people who know what they're doing and get some help. My experience of being in the podcasting industry and working with many hundreds of students and many hundreds of people in the community, going to conferences, hearing people speak, it's such a fun and friendly community. It really is. There hasn't been a community I've been part of that has been friendlier, to be honest. And people genuinely want to help. People genuinely want you to succeed. So if you're new to this, if you're new in the industry, you're a new podcaster, maybe you've not started yet. If you're doing this all yourself, if you're bootstrapping, if you're doing the whole thing yourself, learn all you can. Reach out to people who know what they're doing. Ask for help. There's no shame in asking for help. If you have a budget and you want to start the podcast, maybe you want to do all the creative stuff, you want to, talk into the mic and create the show, but you're not very techy and you don't really have any interest in that side either, then outsource it if you have a budget. Don't let tech be the thing that gets in the way of you starting your podcast. Okay, judgment. This is a big one. It's a mindset issue, isn't it? So we've talked a little bit about this. It's around moving your focus from you onto your listeners. And a little tip that I can give you here, you may have heard it before, but when you're recording your podcast, if you're alone, perhaps you have a solo show and you're in your studio or you're in your little back room or whichever area of your home you're creating your podcast episodes from, have a picture somewhere in your room, even if it's just stuck onto your laptop or just stuck on the wall in front of you, of someone who represents your ideal listener. And focus on that person. Because as a solo podcaster, it can feel quite lonely, can't it? It's a strange thing when you think about it. You sat in a room on your own with headphones on and microphone in front of you, and you're just talking to yourself. But if you have that picture to focus on of who is your ideal listener, then it makes it easier for you to shift that focus from you. And it makes it easier when you're interviewing somebody, for example, and you're trying to decide on the next question you're going to ask the person. And it helps you to listen more in your interviews, because if you're interviewing somebody and they give you an answer and you're just moving on to the next question because you're nervous, taking a breath and thinking, what would Sally, for instance, what would Sally say about that answer? What would she want to know? What extra does she need to know as a result of that answer I've just had from my guest? It gets you to take the focus from you and almost have you act as a vessel for this amazing content from your guest and from your brain to your listeners. And the question, what is the worst that could happen? Yeah, what is the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is that nobody will listen, but that won't happen. That will not happen. Even if you get low downloads at the start, we all know that episode's there forever. As long as you have your podcast up and live, it's there forever. So people could find it in the future. So don't get disheartened if you have low downloads on an episode right now. The snowball effect will kick in and you'll start to get downloads a little bit later on as well. So genuinely, what's the worst that could happen? Everything is editable. If you mess up your words, you say the wrong thing, it's all editable. Right, let's look at fear. So take the first step. This is what it's all about because, quite frankly, fear doesn't go away. It doesn't. It doesn't go away. It just shifts. I think what happens is you become more comfortable being uncomfortable. That's the key. So take that first step. I often say to my students, rip that plaster off. You know, that horrible plaster that might be stuck to a hair on your arm or your leg, and it's really painful to rip off. Once it's done, it's ripped off, it's better. If you're peeling it off really slowly and you're taking your time with it, that's no good. It's going to hurt even more. So take that first step, rip off the plaster. Don't think about the next step that you've got to take. Just think about the one you're taking now. So for you, if fear is a barrier for you getting started, have a think about what your first step would be. And for me, what I normally suggest to women looking to start a podcast and fear is a barrier for them is look for female podcasting communities. Look for others like them. I run a podcasting community called Podcasting for Business Community as part of my podcast. And also I highly recommend She Podcasts as well. They're amazing. There are loads of them out there. So look for others like you. Look for people who have been scared about starting, but they did it anyway. So look for community. And time. So quite often, in my experience, time is often given as an excuse why somebody doesn't want to start a podcast, when really it's one of the other barriers that's got in the way. But if someone is insistent that time is really the issue, why they're not starting, I normally suggest doing a bit of a review. Do a time review. How much time do you actually need to get started? Because I think we all know that attention spans have got a lot shorter these days. It's why TikTok and Reels are doing so well. And it's the same with podcast content. There is a bit of a trend at the moment with solo episodes, certainly, towards shorter form content. So if you're thinking about how long it's going to take you to record and edit, it's probably less than you think. It's probably less time than you think. So do a time review. Write down everything you do over a period of time, let's say a week. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Like all, those wasted hours where you're scrolling on social media, write it down. And then think about where you can carve out 2 hours a week initially to work on your podcast project. You don't have to do it all yesterday. You can take your time with this, but don't take too long. Don't procrastinate. Money. So again, this is similar to time. It's starting with what you have and knowing and having that knowledge that you can grow later. Please, please, please don't let money be the reason that you don't start your podcast. There are lots of ways to start relatively cheaply. So you don't have to spend hundreds of pounds on podcasting equipment and production and everything. You don't have to do all that at the start, especially if you don't know whether podcasting is going to be for you. Just start. But I'm a big believer in high quality sound. So my suggestion here would be, if you're going to invest in something, invest in the quality of the sound. Invest either in editing and in a good quality microphone. And that doesn't mean spending a fortune. It means choosing a microphone that's the best you can afford right now. If you need to borrow one from a friend, do that. Because a podcast is all about the audio. When we think about video, we can rely a little bit on the pictures, can't we? We don't have to rely everything on the audio. But with a podcast, it is all about the sound. Okay, so the best that you can afford for now, and don't beat yourself up over it. Okay, let's move on. So let's wrap up this part of the session. I'm going to go into something else with you in a second, but I just want you to know, based on everything we've said here, is that representation in podcasting is so important. So important. We can't be what we can't see. So all of those young women growing up and hearing podcasts, they're discovering them for the first time. If what they're finding is that the majority of podcasts are hosted by men, and that the podcasts that are doing well are hosted by men, then they have less confidence in themselves to start a podcast of their own. We cannot be what we cannot see. So this is important across every area. So it doesn't have to be just women. It can be people of color. It can be people of different races. It can be queer people. It can be non-binary people. They have to be able to see people like them hosting podcasts. And if that isn't happening, we're doing podcasting a massive disservice, because it's amazing. This thing that we do where we speak into our microphones and we hit a button and it can be listened to anywhere in the world. That's magic, isn't it? So we need to be able to inspire a younger group of people coming through who want to start their podcasts. And they can't do that unless they see you doing it too. So there is always a reason not to start your podcast. So my advice is seek community, take some small steps, and be brave and disrupt. Don't just take what you see in front of you. Be different, start, and be brave. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about Emmeline before I move on to something that I often recommend to women if they are scared of getting their podcast started, or if they don't know if their podcast is, if they don't know whether they want to start just yet. I always recommend guesting. So what I'm going to do is go through a little bit of training for you, something practical to help you to guest on podcasts, essentially, to dip your toe in the water, to see whether it's for you. And it's for you also if you already are a podcaster, because often when we are hosting our own shows, we forget about going on other people's to talk about what we do and about our own podcast. So I'm going to do a little training on that as well, but I want to share with you a little bit about Emmeline. So Emmeline is a brand new podcast network, and we work with women identifying and non-binary podcasters. There's only 29% of podcasters that are female. And what we're aiming to do is destroy gender inequality in podcasting. And we want to do that by supporting small independent podcasters. We want to help them to grow and to help them monetize their shows. What makes us different? Well, lots of podcast networks are focused on a minimum download requirement of X number thousand of downloads. So let's say it could be 10,000 downloads. We have no minimum download requirement. And the reason we can do that right now is because we don't need to monetize this just yet from our perspective. We don't personally need to make money from this right now. We're funding this through our agency because this is genuinely something we want to support these podcasters with. It's a growth-oriented network, and we provide training and tools to help you grow your podcast. We're also putting together bursaries and financial support to train people getting into the industry, and also mentoring. We aren't just a sales team. That's not what this is about, although we do have sponsors and advertisers who are going to be supporting our podcasters. What's most important for us is to build a community to help underrepresented podcasters succeed. And when I talk about underrepresented, I don't just mean people of color and people from lots of different underrepresented groups. What I'm talking about here is underrepresented categories as well. So if you think back to the stats that I shared with you at the start, lots of those podcasts have very low representation of women in them. Business, politics, science, technology. We want podcasters from those categories as well, so that we can support them to grow within their categories. So we're about amplifying voices for women and non-binary folks. We launched today. We're very excited, and you can come and check us out over at We Are Emmeline. So you can check us out on Twitter, over on Instagram, and then of course you can come and follow us at the Podcast Boutique on Facebook as well. So let's talk about guesting now, because I think this is something that's often forgotten as a way to be in the podcasting industry. I'm going to share with you 5 steps to the perfect pitch. And I'm going to talk you through how you can get yourself onto podcasts that are, thank you for sharing that underneath. I do have a link I can share with you, but so 5 steps to the perfect pitch. I'm going to talk to you about how to pitch, how to prepare, what to do during the interview, and what to do after the interview as well. So for me, the biggest focus for you as somebody wanting to go on another show as a guest is focusing on helping the host. Be simple to work with, make it easy for them. Put together a to-the-point email. Quite often we get emails that are paragraphs long. You know the ones. If you have a show and you've had people pitch to you, you know the ones I'm talking about, right? So it's about putting out a paragraph in a email to the host to let them know a few things. I do have a sheet that I can share with any of you listening here. If you just tap me up on social media and I can send it to you, which is an example of an email that you can just fill in the gaps of how you can pitch. Okay. It's important that you listen to their show. Very important, because again, it's so obvious when somebody hasn't listened to your show if they're pitching to be on your podcast. Give them a title for the episode in the email, because we all know coming up with really intriguing episode titles is a bit of work in itself, isn't it? So that you can ease their burden by coming up with a really cool title for the episode that you want to be on as well. So let's say you've pitched. Let's say they've come back to you and they've said, yes, I would love to have you on my show. What are you going to do now? So before the interview, here are 5 things that you're going to do before the interview. So you're going to listen again, but this time you're going to be listening deeper, because you're going to be listening for things like the structure. You're going to be listening for signature questions, the types of content that they produce on the show. You're going to be listening for things like whether they swear or not. I know it's, a funny one to think about, but you need to know whether that's acceptable or not. You need to know what is the status quo around here when you're on somebody else's podcast. You need to be prepared. And by that, I don't mean rocking up with a script. What I do mean is showing up with a piece of paper with some bullet points on of the key points that you want to get across. Maybe some links that you want to share, but just be prepared. Don't show up unprepared. Have the right equipment. Make sure you've done a sound check beforehand. Make sure you've got your microphone, your headphones. Make sure you're in a quiet environment. Do what you can to soften up your environment. You know all this as podcasters. Do what you can to be prepared and show up with the right equipment. Do what you can to minimize interruptions. This was really hard over the past few years, wasn't it, with COVID? But do what you can. If you've got kids around, is there somebody who can take them out for a little while whilst you're recording? Can somebody take the dog out so that it doesn't bark when the postman knocks on the door? What can you do to minimize interruptions? It might just be as simple as letting your family know you're recording so they can keep quiet. That's if you're doing it at home. The final thing is relax. It's easier said than done, especially if you haven't been a guest on a podcast before. but do what you can to relax. So that might be going for a walk beforehand. That might be doing some exercise. It might be having a cup of coffee, which I don't really recommend just before an episode, but do be hydrated. Have a drink in front of you. Maybe some of you like to meditate. Maybe some of you like to visualize. Whatever it is that you do to relax, do something like that before. So a little bonus tip here for you that I always recommend. So don't panic if this isn't you just yet, but if you want to really elevate yourself as a podcast guest, here's something that I recommend. So whenever I go onto other podcasts as a guest, I have a page hidden on my website that I can just duplicate and amend and tweak with a freebie or a guide or something that I'm giving away that I can give of value to their listeners. So this is one that I was on, Women Developing Brilliance, the podcast. So Women Developing Brilliance listeners, welcome. So when they hit this page, they think, oh yeah, this is just for me. It's bespoke. But all it's taken me is 5 minutes to just tweak the wording and the picture. So here is the free Choose Courage guide that we talked about in the episode. Get the guide here. So this is a great way for you to grow your email list by going on to other podcasts as a guest. And it also elevates you. It makes you look very prepared, and it makes it look to the listeners that you have created something just for them. Okay, so that's a little extra tip for you. So during the interview, what do we do then? 5 tips. Be on time. This is the biggest one. I don't know about you, but a lot of podcasters I know, they tend to batch record and they might have several interviews on the same day. So if you're going to be late, everyone after you is going to be late too. Next one is be you. The way you're going to do that is by not showing up with a script, because everybody's going to know that you're reading. No matter how good you think you are at reading, they're going to know when you're reading, okay? Next, you're going to try to minimize the ums and the ers as much as possible. I mean, it is part of normal speech, but if you're constantly delaying, constantly umming and erring, it can get a little bit tiresome to listen to, and definitely tiresome to constantly edit. I don't suggest you edit everything out, but, if it's repetitive, it's just sometimes a bit too much. You're not going to be a robot. And by not being a robot, you're not going to have a script. You're going to have a piece of paper in front of you with some bullet points. Like I have here, a bullet point list of exactly what I want to get across during this session. And then you're going to be camera ready. Now, I have lost track, to be honest, of the amount of times that somebody said to me, yeah, it's just audio only. We're not going to be filming. And then I show up and the camera's on and we're filming, and they've decided to use the video. And I might have my PJs. No, I don't. But, you need to feel confident. So if you know that the camera is going to be on, make sure that you are feeling your best. Okay. Afterwards. So we might think at this point, phew, I've pitched, I've got accepted, I've done the interview, I did all the research, it's done. And you might think now, okay, all I have to do now is share the episode when it comes out. And of course you do have to do that, but I've got some other things that again are going to elevate you a little bit here. So I would say be grateful. So say thank you. Of course you're going to do that. Thank them for having you on their show. The next thing you're going to do is promote the heck out of that episode. Yeah, you all know as podcasters, you want your show to be heard far and wide. So do what you can to promote that episode as much as possible when it goes live. The next one I like to do is to collaborate. So I would normally thank them at the start, obviously, but then about 2 weeks after the episode's gone live, I'll get back in touch with the host. I'll ask them how the episode went. And if I've enjoyed working with them and I think, we've got a good connection, I'll say to them, are there any other ways that we can collaborate together? And it might be that they come onto your show, or you do something in their Facebook group, or there might be something else that you can do together. Don't underestimate the power of this, because it can really open up a lot of opportunities for you by just that one email a couple of weeks after the episodes come out. In that same email, you're going to ask them for a referral. So you're going to say something along the lines of, I'm looking to do more podcast interviews. Who do you recommend that I reach out to? Now, we all know that podcasters know lots of other podcasters. So you might think, yeah, she'd be really good for such a body show. I'm going to send an introduction. So it makes the whole process of pitching to be on podcasts much simpler if you can get a referral as well. And then you're going to go right back to the start again, and you're going to look at your list of potential shows that you would love to be on, and you're going to start again. And I normally say to people, just set yourself a target of the number of shows that either you want to pitch to or the number of shows you want to be on each month or each quarter, whatever works for you. So I hope that has been really useful. You can come and join us over at We Are Emmeline. It's free of charge to register and to be part of the network. As I've mentioned, it's part of, you'll be part of a global network of women, of podcasters who are all wanting to support and collaborate with each other. It's free to join. You're going to have education from some amazing industry experts, and you're also going to get paid. We're going to be sourcing sponsorships because there is strength in numbers here. Okay. If you want to reach out to us at the Podcast Boutique, you can find us online. Our website is thepodcastboutique.com. You can come over to us on Facebook, the Podcast Boutique, and I run a community for my own podcast called the Podcasting for Business Community. And there's about 4,000 people in there, and they're all people who are either existing podcasters or are looking to start a podcast as well. So I hope that has been useful for you. I'm just going to very quickly have a look at the comments here as well. I think there was a couple of questions. I'm not sure. But if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to pop them in there in the chat, and I'll come back to them later. I can't see all of the comments right now because this is streaming right now in so many different places. So I'll definitely go and check out all of that afterwards. So I'll leave it there for everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure today, and have a brilliant rest of your International Podcast Day, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Lynsay, so much for joining us. I love I love the conversation that happened today, and I'm glad that you backed up your information with data and sourcing it from the industry itself. When you talk about, would you do 360 shows, 320 shows?
360.
Yeah, and it's pretty crazy. And as you kind of dial in those numbers, it really gives you a direction in which you want to go with, I'm sorry, I think I pronounced your company wrong at the start of the show, so I apologize for that.
That's okay.
But yeah, what you're doing right now in using the data to guide you and to make informed decisions about, the podcasters that are out there, what resources need to be tailored towards. And I really loved your 5 steps to the perfect pitch, because it's so much more than simply just, showing up, recording, and then the follow-up. There's a lot more multiple steps and steps within those steps. And I think when you look at the data, I was looking at some of your slideshows about, nobody in the top, 20 for sports, or, 20% this, 5% that. It's pretty telling. And we know, the female and non-binary voice is extremely powerful in the space.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
I wanted to provide this a little bit more opportunity for you to share everything that you all have been working on.
Thank you. I'm so glad you did, because I knew the stats would be low, but I didn't know they'd be quite that low. So yeah, it's got us even more energized to get this message out there and to support more of these female voices and non-binary voices, to get them out there and get seen and heard, because there's some incredible shows out there and we're just not seeing them. We're just not seeing them because the 1% of podcasts that are backed by huge networks, they get all the money, they get all of the industry support behind them, which means the gap between those huge shows that are getting all of the sponsorship and advertisements and industry support, the gap between them and the indie podcasters is just going to get wider and wider if we don't do something about it now. And I know you are passionate about this, Dave, that this is about, I believe that indie podcasters are the heart and soul of the industry. It's what it's all about. So I'm really excited about this, and I'm very, very grateful for being given the opportunity to speak about it today. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we since day one, 2014, when Steve and I launched this, then that was always our goal. Is like, hey, we
Mm,
focus on independence. They are moving and they are shaking and they
mm,
are pushing this industry forward in so many different directions. I mean, just
mm,
as our event has evolved over the years, the industry has continued to evolve.
mm,
And I think Demetrius is asking, is there a stat on how many podcasts are indie versus corporate? I don't
mm.
know if there's an overall stat. I know a lot of podcast hosting companies can really provide that, like, nitty gritty kind of detail, yeah, as far as statistics. And and there is that always debate of what defines an indie versus what defines as a corporate. So
Yeah.
there's some boundaries and some lines that I still think are being kind of hashed out and worked out within the industry on its own at this point.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's difficult to get that data, and again, as I shared earlier, we can't really define any further than men and women as well at this stage, and we all know we're not living in that age anymore. Things are more fluid, things are different, and we need to be able to represent the stats in the right way nowadays. So we want to change that, and yeah, it'd be great to be able to see the stats being given more emphasis and getting them cleaned up in the right way so that we can accurately show the progress of our shows and how we're doing. And at the moment, it's a bit finger in the air, isn't it? It's a little bit tricky to do that right now. So, yeah, great question, Demetrius. Thank you for that. Thank you again for having me, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate it. And just to round up our thoughts about, indie podcasters, and that's it seems like where you're living and breathing, where you're trying to do your work, we do the same. We
Mm,
understand the importance of both in the industry, but at the same time, there's a lot of voices, a lot of messages that can be heard, and the indie podcasters from day one, have really moved this industry quite a bit forward. And so having you, Lynsay, as a resource in creating agencies and networks and opportunities for female and non-binary podcasters, I think is amazing. And you had mentioned there's a bunch of communities out there.
yeah.
I think within the space, I think they're well known. The smaller communities, but I think as they grab more of a voice, more resources like you making their presence known, I think it really
Mhm.
just enhances the overall quality and mechanics behind the entire industry.
Yeah, so I've mentioned a couple. So She Podcast, and also which are brilliant, and also a UK one which is called Skylark Collective. They actually had International Women's Podcast Awards yesterday.
Yeah, that's right.
So Naomi, she's fantastic, and she runs a great community too. And I've said I run one podcasting for business communities. They're there. So it's just about sourcing these and being part of them and collaborating and participating in them. So this is the way we grow, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And Demetrius just dropped in the Skylark
Amazing.
Collective.uk .co.uk/awards. And yeah, I was on Twitter trying to follow that yesterday as we were
Yeah.
this event. It's great to see. So, Lynsay, on behalf of the entire International Podcast Day team, Steve, myself, and of course the international podcast community, we want to thank you for joining our event. Congratulations on launching your new network and everything that you're doing in the space on Podcast Day itself. So, we really appreciate it, and thank you from the bottom of our hearts for making this day happen for us.
Thank you so much. Good luck for the rest of the day, everyone.
All right. Well, thanks everybody, and hope you continue to celebrate International Podcast Day by tuning in here and also celebrating throughout the world by using hashtag International Podcast Day. And once again, happy International Podcast Day, everybody.